The original Hebrew title of Exodus means, "and these are the names of," which is derived, as was the custom, from the opening words of the book. The title we are familiar with, Exodus, which means exit or departure, comes from the Septuagint and refers, of course, to the main event of the book, the departure of Israel from Egypt. Our key verse, or rather verses, are 6 and 7 of chapter 6. "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians." As previously discussed, there's no reason to deviate from the traditional belief that Moses is the author of the Exodus and the other books of the Pentateuch. The narrative of Exodus covers the period from about 1806, at the death of Joseph, to the end of the encampment at Mount Sinai in 1445 BC. This slide shows how the key events fit into the broader timeline. And this one gives you an overview of the main events in the life of Moses. The book takes us on a journey from captivity in Egypt to Mount Sinai, and it follows the route of the Exodus, as can be seen in this map. Exodus focuses on two major events: the Israelite deliverance from slavery in Egypt through God's mighty act of salvation at the Exodus and the Red Sea, and then secondly, the giving of the law and the establishment of God's rule over the nation at Mount Sinai. We're going to divide up Exodus into three main sections. 1 to 15 is the Egyptian period. 16 to 17 is the account of the journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai. And 18 to 40 is the period of time when they were camped at Sinai. So in the first 15 chapters we have the Egyptian period. First of all, in chapter 1, Israel's proliferation and plight. During their time in Egypt, the family of Jacob increased rapidly, and this population explosion, so feared and hated by Pharaoh, was proof that God keeps his promises, beginning with Abraham and reiterated down through the generations, that the Israelites would be a great nation, fruitful and numerous as the stars of heaven and as the dust of the earth. But the number of the Israelites became so large that the king of Egypt considered them a threat to the security of his land. But despite Pharaoh's attempts to destroy the Hebrews by forced labor and by genocide, God frustrated his plans, further proof that God not only keeps his people, but also his promises. And then in chapters 2 to 6 we have Moses' preparation. Moses was born during this period and hidden in a basket in the reeds along the Nile. Discovered by a daughter of Pharaoh, he was adopted by her and grew up as a member of the Egyptian court. Aside from the few brief facts recorded in chapter 2, nothing is known about Moses' youth. And when he reappears, he is a mature adult. Having killed an Egyptian for beating a Hebrew, he was forced to flee Egypt to the land of Midian, where he married Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, priest of Midian, and remained in that land for 40 years. And one day, while looking after his father-in-law's sheep, Moses came to Horeb, the mountain of God, another name for Sinai. And here he encounters God in the burning bush and is called and commissioned to return to Egypt to lead the Israelites to freedom. And then the rest of chapter 6 through to 15, we have the account of God's power. We have the plagues. So in obedience to God's call, Moses, supported by Aaron, commands Pharaoh to release the Hebrews. But of course he refuses, and so a series of plagues is inflicted on Egypt and his people. In the Passover meal, a year-old male animal from the flock was sacrificed, roasted and eaten. Some blood from the sacrifice was to be daubed on the lintel and doorposts of the Israelite homes, marking them off, so that God would pass over and spare their firstborn. The Exodus is, of course, the great Old Testament motif of salvation and the great rescue accomplished by God through Christ in the cross. Every rescue God accomplishes for his people in the Bible, however small in and of itself, is meant to point to the great rescue of Calvary. And in many ways, the Exodus and the crossing of the Red Sea are two parts of the same story, and are both vitally dependent on each other. You see, the Israelites needed to see with their own eyes the mass destruction of the Egyptian forces, so they would not be looking over their shoulders all the time, wondering if Pharaoh and his army were still after them. In chapters 16 and 17, we have the journeying period. The journey from Egypt to Mount Sinai took the Hebrews about 7 weeks, during which time God provided quail, manna, and water for them to eat, miraculously, of course, bringing the water out of a rock for them to drink. And of course, they also conquered the Amalekites at Rephidim. A journey of 7 weeks brings the Israelites to Mount Sinai, where they camped before the mountain. On the instructions of God, Moses goes up the mountain several times, where God speaks with him and delivers to him the 10 Commandments. Deuteronomy 5 makes it clear that this is the covenant which Israel is invited to accept. God also gave Moses detailed instructions for the construction and furnishing of the tabernacle, all of which are carried out in precise detail. In the midst of all of this is the incident of the golden calf, which concludes with the judgment on 3,000 of the people, the renewal of the tablets of stone, and provides a dramatic and fearsome lesson about the holiness of God. Among the many lessons and themes in Exodus is the divine name revealed by God to Moses, a new way of making known his personal covenant person. It's the name I Am, which is translated as Yahweh, and is known technically as the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name. And then we have, of course, an emphasis on the law, and it's been traditional and helpful to divide the law into 3 distinct categories. There's the moral law, with the special status of the 10 Commandments, and the tablets, of course, were put into the ark as a lasting memorial. And these are the moral laws that apply to all people of all time because they reflect the character of God. You have the judicial law, or if you like, the civil law, the preparation of the people of God to live in a theocratic nation in Canaan, and binding on them in that situation, but not binding on us today. And then the ceremonial law, with the focus on the tabernacle and the rituals and the sacrifices, all fulfilled in Christ, and therefore no longer applicable to us. So where do we find Christ in Exodus? Well, we're certainly not short of Christological references. Christ is, of course, the Passover lamb, a rich New Testament theme, which sheds much light on the Old Testament ceremony and ritual. And Christ's death, like that of the Passover lamb, was both an act of supreme judgment and of great deliverance. There's the Exodus itself and delivery from slavery in Egypt. And the Exodus event presents a major metaphor of God's saving work. There's his presence in the pillar of cloud and fire as he leads his people. There's the provision of the manna, the bread of life, as well as the water from the rock. There's the symbolism of the tabernacle, with the altar of sacrifice and all the other elements of the tabernacle. And there's the role of the high priest. And my summary statement of Exodus, again summarizing the content but also its relevance for us today, is that God delivers his people, destroys their enemy, and distinguishes them by his law.